blank slate. All right, that's one slate on that side. Then so on, so forth. Now in the center. This is going to be the one-on-one. Take 1D with that girl that doesn't remember me from high school. Anyways, let's go ahead and do this. You're off the hook though.
I know, she told me.
Yeah, right. Okay. All right, this is take one. You guys can start when you're ready.
Introduce yourself. Why don't we start with you, Britt?
Okay. Hi, I'm Britt Vargas, and I'm from Thousand Oaks, California, and I work at a church.
Nice. My name is Jael. I'm from Los Angeles. I live in Whittier, and I'm retired.
Love that. I love that. What did you do before you retired?
I was an investigator
Oh, okay.
for discrimination and stuff
Wow.
like that. Yeah.
Okay. Wow. I love that.
Yeah,
Awesome.
good.
So what was the biggest holiday for your family and how was it celebrated?
Do you want to go first?
Go
Okay,
ahead.
I'll go first. Biggest holiday, I think, a part of my culture. So my father's from Ecuador and my mother's from Mexico, and we all love family, like gathering family. I loved it when we'd bring in, especially people who weren't Hispanic, into our gatherings for holidays. They'd be like, "I thought only your immediate family is here," and I was like, "Yeah, they are."
Right.
But my dad was the baby of 8 children, and my mom was the baby of 4. And so I think the holidays, like Christmas, was really big for us. I think a lot of the times we didn't always have money to get these extravagant gifts, and so for us, just the big, I think, celebration of being together and sharing a meal together was just something that impacted me in a way that I continue to love. To be with people, quality time was just such a big thing for our family. So Christmas time and the holidays, I remember there were so many moments where we would all jump in the car with a giant bowl of popcorn and drive down the streets of Hastings Ranch and just watch all of the lights and just
Sure.
enjoy each other's company, sing at the top of our lungs all the Christmas carols. And for me, it was just a huge special moment for us. My mother was also an elementary school teacher, and so it was always this time where she'd get winter break off too and Christmas break. And so we really loved just getting time with my mom, and just being together was just one of the things I'll never forget.
That sounds really nice.
What about you?
Yeah, we have a big family as well, and when I was little, my grandmother and grandfather were still alive, and so we'd all gather at their house for Thanksgiving. And so there'd be maybe 50, 60 people at our gatherings, and it was just so sweet. You know, I could see all my cousins. My mother's mother is the grandmother I'm talking about, and they had 9 children. And some of those children had a whole bunch of children, right? So there might be 50 cousins there in my generation, and it was just so sweet. You know, and we spent a lot of time with my grandmother. And so as I grew up, my grandparents were both dead by then, right, as I'm an adult. But I wanted to bring that back together, so I started having a gathering on December 23rd. Instead of just Christmas Eve or Christmas Day, because I knew the individual families had their own traditions by then. So I invited all of them over. And so at our house, until pandemic, we'd have usually 45 or 50 people.
Wow.
And it was just wonderful. And we'd sing Christmas carols, we'd talk, because we hadn't seen each other, you know, in several months or whatever. And there'd always be new family members, you know, and I'd see some little toddler running around and say, "Whose baby is that?" You know, because you don't get to know everybody.
Yeah.
And so having that time together, spending it with your family is just so precious, you know.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, as you were saying that, I just imagine my own family being like that. And I remember it was normal, but it was weird for other people to walk
Right.
in to just see the massive
Right.
amount of people. But there was just so much joy and all the kids. And there was never a celebration where we wouldn't end up dancing to
Nice.
some cumbias or something like that, and where
Yeah.
it was just this togetherness. And I
Yeah.
loved that.
Yeah, my
you
dad was a
experienced that.
singer.
Oh.
And so he would sing, he'd start the carols, and then we'd all join in, and then I have a stepfather and a father. So my stepfather's the one I grew up with, and he was the singer.
Oh.
And my biological father was a musician, so he'd accompany my dad, and it was just, it's nice. It's nice. And because they were together a lot, I don't really understand when families don't have the former spouse or whatever, because we just, once you're in the family, you're in, no matter what happens after that. And so there would be, like, my uncle would be there, but he's no longer married to my auntie, stuff like that. And it was everybody, and it was special.
Wow,
So, yeah,
that's amazing.
yeah.
That's
nice.
really cool.
Yeah.
So in your families, what messages, spoken or unspoken, did you receive about white people, Black people, and Latino or Hispanic people?
I can say about white people, there wasn't a lot of discussion about white people using those words. Just, when you go to school, you have to make sure that you do your best all the time. Okay. Make sure that you're dressed properly. Make sure that you're always neat. Make sure, all these things that we had to make sure we did, right? But you never said the word white people because it's understood. They're the ones in charge. They're the ones teaching. They're the ones who are the principals. They're the ones who are the security people. They're the ones that you would have to interact with and make sure that you did that in a positive way. So we never really talked about white people. Now my dad, my stepfather, he would say the white man. And it's funny because my dad's skin color is about the same as yours. And I remember him using this term one time, blue-eyed devils. And I was like, what is that? And he told me that's what we used to call white people. And I'm like, wow. Well, my dad's eyes were gray and he was very pale. And it always surprised me that he had this view, because when I looked at him, he looked like a white person, except his hair, right? So it was weird. And my mom is dark like me, not as dark as I am, but you know who's in charge, so you behave in a way that doesn't get you in trouble. That's basically it.
Yeah, I think I resonate the same way. I don't think our family ever really said it out loud. I think one of the things I wish we talked about more was race and, the kind of unspoken rules about life. I think each segment of my bringing up. So when I was a young kid in elementary school, I grew up in LA and was very deep into the downtown area. And so I was surrounded by a lot of Hispanic culture. And then moving into like my middle school years, started going to a Christian school and was very much in that Caucasian space a lot more. But it was also interesting because of where it was located in St. Gabriel, where there's also that Asian influence as well. And then in high school, going to Arcadia High School, where I was like full in, where I think all my friends in high school were of some Asian descent. And so I wish we had had more conversations and were more open about it, but it was just like these rules where it was almost like you touch the stove and it was hot and you're like, oh, okay, we don't do that again. And so I resonate with the fact that even within my own family and the way that I looked, I was like praised a little bit more than my cousins would. I remember having a conversation with my mom. And white was almost like the standard, and if you can look more white, then you were going to get farther. And I remember having this conversation with my mom, saying that she had to have a conversation with her mom, my grandmother. And I was the firstborn in my family. And then I have a brother that's 3 years younger. And at the time, my mom would notice that my grandmother would treat me different than my other brother. And it was one of those moments where I didn't know any better, but my mom noticed that and had like the conviction to call my grandmother higher. And that was a hard conversation for her. But then it opened up this whole other conversation between my mother and my grandmother in the fact that my grandmother was the dark, dark one. And when she lived in Mexico, like that was not what we wanted. And she was not going to go anywhere. She was going to stay poor. Like there was no hope for her. And so when she has a daughter who had a daughter who can pass, she was so excited about that. And I think subconsciously didn't realize, like almost like that I got somewhere because of what my granddaughter looks like. And so I think for me, I wish we had more of communication with our family on being more open about it, instead of just being like, this is how it always is, and just learning like you got to make your family proud. And family comes first. And so we continue to live by that as a culture, as a family. Like I feel like it always boils down to that, where we look at, okay, well, you have to be perceived in a certain way because you got to make your family proud. You have to be act and dress in a certain way and be in the right schools. And I know that even for us, when we moved out of LA into Arcadia, it took a while, but that was like my parents' like dreams was to get out of LA. And I know that conversations afterwards when I was in high school, I was like, why'd you pick here? And they're like, well, because it wasn't a lot of Mexican people around. Like there weren't a lot of Hispanic people around. And you could go to a better school, and that's what we want for you. And so it's very interesting to see now as an adult looking back how many times we did have those conversations without actually having those conversations. It was just something that was so embedded not only in my life as a child, but also like in the groundwater of my family growing up, and how my grandmother immigrated here on just like the clothes on our back and hope and a dream, with also my dad coming here with his whole family and the struggle. So for them, their grandchildren, and my parents, their children, and my aunts and uncles and my cousins, it was like this dream to like do better. And so for them, that was like, okay, be like a white person. Do like what the white people, be in those spaces. And it was almost like I remember getting like a pat on the back sometimes when it's like, oh, you're the only Latina in there? Good job. Like you're doing something, And I think there's goodness in being that, but then there's also goodness in knowing that we have to talk about these things. We have to be open and name those things, because if we don't name them, we can't start beginning to heal them, right? And so, yeah,
it's so interesting because it's unspoken, but that's what you're supposed to aspire to. But I'm Black. Nobody's going to mistake me for anything other than that. And as I was a little girl, I knew I'm supposed to be smart. I'm supposed to do my best. But I didn't know that if I was too smart, that was bad. I didn't know until I'm in class and we're doing a math problem. I'm in a Christian school, right? We're doing a math problem. And the teacher shows us the answer on the board, and she said it took her 4 steps to do it. And I raised my hand. I was so proud. And I said, Miss Rydeen, I did it in 3 steps. Is this right? And she said, you think you're so smart, you get up and teach the class. I'm like 9 years old. I thought I was supposed to be smart and make her proud, but it made her angry. I didn't know what to do, right? I had no clue what to do. I thought I knew the rules, but I didn't. And so I started realizing it's like there's white people here, then there's Asian people, then there's Hispanic people that look like they've been here for a while, then there's Hispanic people that look like they haven't been here long, and then we're down there, right? Especially because I was so dark. I'm way down here. And what can I do to get out of that? And so the rules seemed like they were straightforward, but they weren't. They weren't. And I was in a Christian school. And I had teachers ask me, what color does your skin turn when you get a bruise? little boy called me Black Sambo, and the teacher thought it was because he liked me. That was her answer when I went to her crying. So it's like, what do you do when you think you know the rules, but you don't?
Yeah.
And so what do you talk about? Many of those things I didn't even bring to my parents, because what were they going to do? You know, as I started learning the hierarchy and the value that people placed on what your skin looked like, what your hair looked like. And it was really disheartening. I always knew God loved me, which is what made me be able to still be happy. But knowing how much other people didn't love me had an effect. And they didn't even know me. And I was sweet. You know what I mean? I wasn't a bad kid, but it didn't matter. There was a judgment from the moment they saw my face. Yeah. And that's a hard thing. There's no assimilation. You can't turn into something that you're not.
Yeah. How do you think that has affected you as an adult?
Well, I understand a lot better now. I think growing up, I wanted my kids to not have that experience. And so I did my best to prepare them, right? And tell them people may not think that you're as fantastic as you are, but they're wrong. You know, you are fantastic. You're the smartest kid I know. I had 3 kids, and I gave them each that same foundation to tell them, I love you, but more importantly, God loves you, and He's given you a brain that's powerful. You're going to be smarter than everybody else in your class. Some people may not like that, but it doesn't matter what they like. God gave you that as a gift, so use it, right? Don't push it down. Your sense of humor, don't push it down. Be yourself, because whether you are or not, people are still going to judge you. So at least let them know who you are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing.
Jael, if you could speak uninterrupted, unquestioned, you knew they would listen, what would you say to white people in general?
I think it would depend on who the person is. There's so much to say, but I would only want to say something that matters to that person. So if it's someone that thinks that my experiences that were negative were not because I'm Black, that it had to be some other reason, I think at that point, I would let them know I'm not talking about 1 or 2 things. I think that's the thing that I found when I talk with people that are having discussions about race, but that are white. If I tell them a story about how I was treated badly, or how, as a 10-year-old girl, I'd be walking my brother home from school, and white men would call me a nigger first and then tell me they wanted to have sex with me. I'm 10 years old. So when people don't believe that it's because of your race, you can tell 100 stories and they still might not believe it. So I don't want to tell my whole story to everybody, you know, because it's mine, and I'm sensitive to that. So I would tell people what I think they can handle. I can't tell everything. It's too hard. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing. Yeah.
Britt, you mentioned some of the things that were unsaid, but you kind of had to, like, whiteness was a standard.
Yeah.
How is that, same question that you asked her about how things have affected her as an adult, how has that affected you as an adult now? And have you started expressing more of your culture, more of your, you know,
Yeah.
in a different way, if that makes sense what I'm asking?
Yeah. Wow, first of all, thanks. Thank you for sharing. My heart just breaks. I think the Lord gives us testimony because he knows that it gives power.
That's true.
Not for our glory, because glory only looks good on God, but
Yeah.
for his. I think for myself, having this standard that's super unattainable, and then almost having to shove down my culture because I've been put on this like unforeseen like pedestal of you look white, so act like it,
Yeah.
because you're gonna pull the family with you, you know. I moved out of LA and I work for a church and I love the church so much. But one of the things I noticed is I don't have community that's deep because of my background and my upbringing. I know around the time of George Floyd and all of that was happening, I was in charge of social media for our church. There's things that I really wanted to say. There's things I couldn't say. There's things that maybe were too hot to say. And then having like the burden of being this standard. I remember my own family questioning me. They're like, you're gonna risk going and being out with people to demonstrate? And I said yes. I didn't see my family for a while because they're like, you can't come over because you've been around people. But I thought it was so important for me as a Latina to stand there with my Black brothers and sisters, because I'd hope if that were one of mine, I'd hope that they would do the same.
Yeah.
I think that TV sometimes glamorizes, the news glamorizes this like beef between Latinos and, you know, African Americans. And I think if I can make one small step towards saying, no, like, I see you and I hear you and may not understand every single part, but I hope to be, you know, here as it is in heaven. And so if my, you know, little self can take myself to the corner of some street in Ventura County and stand with a sign that says, I'm Latina and I see you and I want to stand with you, will you teach me? Has been such a journey. Has been such a journey to just stop and listen and pause. Yeah. And to feel like it's okay to be like, man, I was wrong in those things. I could do better. And to listen and hear, not to comment, but to just hear. It's been a journey so far, and I'm more hopeful as I go through, and like having books like, you know, How We Love Matters, I think is like the first step into opening up, and we could have these conversations. And now I get to know you and your story and have that tucked in my heart every time that I interact with other people in this world. But I think as a Latina who's been like going through all of this as well, in a space where it's predominantly white, and I find sometimes I catch myself assimilating in ways and not realizing why I'm so frustrated and being like, man, but no, like my culture does matter. And you know, my grandma wanted to learn English so bad, so she only spoke English, and so my Spanish isn't as great as it should be because she was embarrassed of her Spanish. So my mother really never learned. And I think sometimes I get in these bubbles where I feel like I'm safe. But I remember I was driving home from one of the demonstrations, and I'm just like in my red Toyota Yaris. And I decided, it was this moment, I was like, I'm gonna embrace who I am. And so I played one of my grandfather's like favorite songs that we would dance to at some celebration, and I just turned it up and I rolled down the windows and I was just driving home. And it wasn't really even that late. And I remember I stopped at a light and there was no one else except this big giant truck that comes and stops right next to me. And I had the windows down, so I felt very exposed. And then all of a sudden, I noticed that there was like this American flag right from the very back of the truck. And my parents never told me to be afraid of any of that, but my experience had told me different. And so I remember I just like, I instantly went down and like turned down my music. And then all of a sudden I just see like these 4 men in the car start yelling at me, go back to Mexico. And then all of a sudden they started throwing cheese slices at my car.
Oh my God.
And I had never experienced that before. Yeah. But simply because I was blasting some mariachi music, this whole thing like came to be. And it made me like stop and realize like, man, I sometimes take what I look like for granted because I can walk into spaces that other people can't. And if this is what other people have experienced, like yourself, like my heart breaks. And sometimes I, like in that moment, felt so helpless. Mm-hmm. I'm like, what do I do? Like, I don't know. And that was like my first experience. And I remember getting home and I like ran straight to my room and I called my dad. And I literally told him, I was like, why haven't you never told me? Like this was reality. Yeah. And I think we had a really good conversation, but it came out to like, well, you don't look really that Latina, so I didn't think that you would need to know those things. That
it wouldn't impact you.
Yeah. And I think so for me, it's just been a journey of realizing this is people's realities every day.
I would imagine, though, being in your position, I mean, it has to be quite complex, right? To just go out in a day and know some people are going to see me as white. Some people are not going to see me as white, but may not know what I am. I mean, that has to lend its own questions, you know, about your own identity, right? Mine is clear, but it must be quite a journey, though, to be able to go in and out of these spaces and not want to always take that easy road, right?
Yeah. I think it definitely is a journey as I've become more of an adult and aware, and I think, you know, being stuck at home for a long time really just sifted out a lot of things and ugliness about our humanity, that I think it's just been this testament of like, man, this is why we're so in need of a savior.
Yeah.
Like this is why like God saw us like this and was so in love with that. Like that blows my mind away, that like he sees all the crooks and crannies of the evil in our hearts, and yet still was like, but I'm going to send my son anyways because I love them.
Yeah.
And I just wish to have more conversations with people to be able to share that, but also reflect that, like Jesus' love in every single space. But it is quite difficult.
I could imagine. Sometimes it's easy because my life has not been smooth in my interactions with other races, right? So sometimes it's easy to just dwell on that and think about the things that have happened to me and my cousins and my son. You know, it's easy. But as I've started to talk with more people and learn more about our history, there's so many different groups that have been all pushed down. You know, it's easy to say it's a black and white situation, but while that's true, that's not all it is, right? So thanks to being at Fellowship, I have a lot of Asian young women friends now, right? And when the killings happened in Atlanta, my heart was just broken. But it never had been broken before for something that happened to another race. Because in my heart, well, it's not as bad as what happened to us. But my heart isn't like that anymore because we all have our own difficult journeys. If we love God and want to show love to other people, it's hard. And so now I can feel that empathy for what you've been going through and what you still have decisions about, right? I can feel for my Asian friends who are sometimes taught to not say anything, you know, and the pressure on you to bring your family up, that's a lot. And the empathy that comes from recognizing how much God loves us and how he sits with us when we're in pain. So we can do that for other people. That is a blessing that brings more emotion, but so much more gratitude for how much people can be loving and yet not agree, be loved and yet not always feel like they're in the right place, but you still feel the love from your friends. You still feel that love from God when your friends aren't able to show you. That only comes from understanding that we're all on a path, and it's different for each of us. It's difficult for each of us. For a white person who's never had to deal with this, can you imagine how hard this is? Everybody just talking about everything now. You know, they've never had to. I have a white friend who I spent time just talking with her after George Floyd was murdered, and she said something that threw me so much. She said, "This must be an exciting time for you." And I didn't really understand what she meant. So I said, "What do you mean?" And she said, "Well, you can just talk about whatever you want to." And I said, "Well, it has freed me up to have conversations where I wouldn't have before." She said, "But for me, I'm afraid to go outside because someone might shoot me." I don't know where she got that from. And my first thought was, what? But there's fear that has to be replaced by love, right? And it can only happen when we sacrifice, when we put ourselves out there and have these conversations and let the fear come out so it can be replaced. It can be filled.